Were you surprised that Mr. Murdoch began to sell off the crown jewels?
I like to put a different spin on it.
Please.
He's taking his holdings and becoming the largest taxable shareholder in Disney. So, he's going to own about 100 million shares of Disney. The stock's 110. It's 11. Last time I did the math, pretty significant holdings. So he basically understands the globalization. He understands scale. He understands the direct to the consumer. And he has these challenges. And so I think the financial engineering, while unexpected, was different. Part A, he didn't go out and take a premium for his voting stock, which I'm surprised. Okay. Secondly, he's paying about $8 billion, maybe a lot less, $6.5 billion, depending on the tax structure, to have this transaction done where he takes old Fox, becomes spin Fox, new Fox, and he merges with Disney. And but he becomes a large shareholder.
Within this is Bob Iger. My history of Bob Iger, out of Ithaca College, he ended up over at ABC, went up the food chain, the whole Eisner blow up, and all that is Disney did this, it'll fail. No. Disney did this, it'll fail. No. Disney did this. What's Disney going to do with, for example, The Simpsons? What's the pixie dust that Bob Iger has with content?
Good question. And from my point of view, I do it totally different. You have a company that's doing $18 billion of EBITDA, earnings before taxes. They pay about $4 billion of capex. Okay, so now they're taking on $5.5 billion, the way I look at it, and with growth, they're talking $6 billion. But the capex, Tom, is $100 million. So
next to nothing.
And they go global. They go direct to the consumer now in sports and entertainment. And they've got, content. Now, will we be able to move one studio into the other one? Do we need to have the big six that we had forever in terms of movie studios? What happens next?
Do you assume in 2018 and into the coming years further consolidation in the business? How do the people respond to this? Let's talk like Les Moon visits CBS. What does he do at CBS when he sees all these other players in action?
Well, part of the challenge, Tom, is that you have Alphabet, you have Google, you have these behemoths, Amazon, I meant, and you have other companies like that have market caps of $500 billion. Forget about Alibaba and Tencent. You're talking about just U.S. Mm-hmm. And these companies, like Fox had $70 billion. Time Warner's only $80 billion. Les Moonves has 400 million shares of a $60 stock is $24 billion. So how do they get scale, and how do they do it at an accelerated rate in a world that's changing quickly? And that's the challenge. Meanwhile, obviously, the tax cut helps. Meanwhile, the net neutrality rules are in play. Meanwhile, there's less regulation coming down. At the same time, you'd ask what's going on in regulation. So I look at this and say, does Les and his team understand Gen Z, Gen Y, live entertainment, live news? How do they play that? Sports are great like that, and he's got his hands on it.
So you've mentioned sports twice. Are you suggesting that, again, the pixie dust, to use the phrase from Mr. Disney, that the pixie dust can be there for ESPN? Do they salvage traditional TV, or do all of your research people, Gabelli, Chris Berengi, and the rest of them, are they all saying, no, it's a whole new world after all?
Well, there's another dynamic, and that is not only viewers, Tom, but the media pie. The media pie is like $550 billion. It's gone targeted medicine, targeted advertising, and how do you do that in a linear world? You got to go digital. Digital is now 40% of the advertising. That's where the challenge is. Not only that, how do you keep...
Give me one digital name you like right now. Let's do a Barron's thing right now. Digital, some obscure name Mario Gabelli knows in digigital.
From that point of view of, do we own a South African company, Naspers, that owns Tencent? Do we buy Alibaba? I like to stay domestic. And to the degree that Jeff Bezos is changing the world in terms of distribution and price efficiency. So there's a lot of companies that we have in that category.
Okay, within that, and you mentioned Mr. Bezos, he's not in Graham, Dodd, and Cottle, the classic securities analysis book. You go down the income statement, Mario, it doesn't look like anything else you own. How do you own Amazon?
Well, reverse that. I won't go shopping now without somebody telling me what it would cost to buy a TV set at Costco versus buying it on Jet, which is Walmart. And so we do price comparison. And that's terrific. That's helping the American consumer become more efficient. It's helping transfer. And there's going to be bottlenecks, and there's going to be, the company's going to get too big, and he's going to run into some issues of scale and size and distortion of marketplace, but that's okay. This is the free market. It's innovation, creative destruction. I call it creative innovation.
Do we see creative destruction in banking? I want to do banking and then get to tax reform here. Quickly, banking, we've come out of the crisis. We're 10 years on. Can you own the big banks? Can you own the regional banks? Or are you owning a bank, I don't know, in Sioux Falls?
Of course. The answer is the smaller companies would see significantly financial interest changing. That will cause another round of mergers. But the banks have less regulation under a certain size that were crushed. You would read M&T annual report, you read Jamie Dimon's report, brilliant analysis of the world and the incremental costs and the burdens to the. And then on the other side, Tom, they had an electric fence around them for about 10 years. That is changing. They are in fundamentally great shape. So for another year or two, they'll be terrific. Less regulation, lower taxes, and a rising yield curve, even though somebody would argue it's flat. At some point, it'll rise for other reasons. And so the financial sector is good. So buy the ones that they're going to buy. What is Jamie Dimon going to buy? Is he going to buy State Street? Is he going to buy somebody?
Well, give us an answer. What's he going to buy? Is it a small bank in Sioux Falls or is it a regional?
No, come on. Why go through the regulatory hassle of buying Florida Coastal Country Bank's FCB, which you want to own because everybody's going to flee New York?
Do you see how we get? This is not fair. Do you see how Mr. Gabelli always gets in 8 names so we can push the stock up with FCB?
We own a lot of banks in Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, because those are where the money's going to flow.
And that's where the people are.
And why? Because, are there health reasons or is it financial health reasons? Look, the tax rules will change and behaviors.
Within the tax rules, I don't care what you think about Senator Corker, Senator Rubio, and the rest of the senators on Capitol Hill. I want to know what happens to your Wall Street and the financial system the day the president signs that bill.
Well, assuming it's signed next week, what will happen is that small companies in America will receive a blessing because their cash tax and their book tax are higher than 30%. Now, large corporations like Amazon, and Apple, they hide money offshore.
Sure.
They go, and so they don't get helped as much. But we're worried about American industry, American business, and drive that spirit and bring jobs back and bring companies back because I would think of going to Dubai. I would think about, because the corporate tax rate is 0, I'd think about going to Hong Kong. The corporate tax rate drives me. Now, America is going to be a magnet for jobs and creation because I'm looking at my biggest cost. I will hire 11 new analysts, by the way. I've only got 3 or 4 identified, so write to me. 1-800-Gabelli, call me or figure out if you want to join us.
So this is
Absolutely.
a job search for Gabelli?
What do you think? Mike Bloomberg would call me to take his machines.
That's a good idea. Do you need a few more next year?
Absolutely. Good for you.
Absolutely. I like that. We're going to have Bloomberg Terminals, TV Go. You can watch it with Mario Gabelli at his shop with Howard Ward. On the tax reform bill, there is a lot of question about if it's fair. It's fair to corporations. It's fair to the donor class like you, and I would suggest Mr. Bloomberg. But is it fair to the people that you grew up with when you were going to Fordham Prep? There's a huge distrust about the Republicans in Washington with the little guy out there. How do you address that right now?
Well, I think that a large portion of America does own stocks through their 401k. I'm working in a union. I have a pension plan. The union's pension plan is tied to stocks. They have a 60% equities, 40%. So there's a lot of ripple effects. On the other side of the coin, the earned income credit, whereby if you're making $20,000 and they give you back $2,000 or $3,000, that's a very important part of creating the fairness. What I don't like, Tom, is the carried interest. Why did they not get rid of that? That allows you to take ordinary earned income and pay capital gains tax. That's absurd. They can't get rid of that.
I want you to speak once more with your heritage of New York City about sanctuary cities and where New York City and other major cities in this nation stand. They have an immigrant culture. It's a more diverse culture, and they feel beleaguered in Washington right now. How will that play out next year into the coming years?
Well, there's no question that you want to have an open border. That Statue of Liberty says what America stands for. On the other side of the coin, I have individuals that are joining me from school. One is a Brit, one is a Chinese guy, one is a Canadian, and I can't get them jobs. So we have to re-examine how do we bring in the best talents on a global basis and yet keep control of this country from having individuals that come in that really don't feel the same passion. When the immigrants came in 100 years ago, they changed their language to English. and basically they don't, they assimilate. And so we'll do that. We'll figure that out. It'll work. I mean, basically, this is a terrific melting pot. It's a mosaic of cultures.